Well, I just listened to sort of a long rambling from George Gammon on his second channel, Rebel Capitalist, which is a great listen. If you guys are not familiar, I would recommend going over there and subscribing. And he was talking about um, a lot of things that are consistent economically with what I've been seeing and with what I've been talking about. George is now sort of over in my part of the world. He's in Southwest Florida, and so his anecdotal evidence that he was presenting was interesting to me in particular because I'm very near where he is, so I'm seeing a lot of the same things. But it's also applicable across the country, and what I particularly found interesting that I sort of wanted to expand upon was his invocation of Gresham's law. Now, Gresham's law is an economic principle that basically says that when bad money chases out good money. And the idea originally comes from if you had a legal tender law that said that you had to accept a piece of paper, like let's say a paper dollar or a paper mark in Germany, that was not redeemable for any sort of, it was not redeemable in specie. You couldn't take that dollar bill to the bank and get gold out of it, but you had to accept it as if it were a gold coin. What would end up happening is that everyone would hoard their gold coins and not want to give them away, not want to spend them on anything, and they would only spend the paper money. And so by making a law like that, the paper dollars would flood the market, and all of the gold coins or silver coins or whatever was specie would just disappear from the market. And so he took that idea and he expanded it really just to goods in general, and how he himself was starting to think when he was talking about buying a truck to drive around, which, by the way, it's something I'm very familiar with the market for used 90s four-wheel drive diesel trucks. Something I've been interested in since I was very young, when they were very cheap. When you could play in that game with under $5,000, buying and selling those sorts of trucks. Hell, I'm old enough to remember when you could buy a 12-valve four-wheel drive, Cummins Dodge pickup truck on Craigslist for around $4,000. And he was talking about how, because those kinds of trucks retain their value very well, they've only gone up in my lifetime. A lot of them, these days will sell for much more money than you could have bought them for new. They have not depreciated at all. They've appreciated over the past, 20 to 30 years. And so George was telling the story that, he decided to go and buy a 97 7.3 Ford four-wheel drive, because he knew it would retain its value, and he needed something to drive around for a while, and he figured, okay, well, I can sell this later and get some more money out of it if I buy it right, which is true. If you know what the value of these trucks are, you can do very well buying and selling them, or at least you used to be able to. And that's kind of what George just also brought up here, is that in the last couple of years, even though these trucks were getting very, very expensive, they were sort of out of the realm where I didn't want to buy them anymore. I'm happy with what I have. I have 2 trucks from that era. And I'm very happy with them. They're very reliable. There's no reason for me to buy or sell anymore. But George has gotten to that point as well, and he said, and again, there's a point to this. But after buying this truck, he thought to himself, "Gee, why would I sell this in a year when I don't need it anymore? Because if I want to buy one back later in a couple of years, I might have to pay double for it, because the price of these trucks, the value has doubled over the last couple of years." So if there's any chance that I might ever want a truck like this ever again, and I might ever need one, I'm not, I should not sell this ever. And what he realized is that is the mindset of Gresham's law. That's why Gresham's law is a law. It's not something that people consciously think about. It's just how people respond to changing economic conditions. We're at the point to where the dollar value of goods in this economy, goods and services, is increasing at such a rate that people would much rather hang on to goods than to hang on to dollars. In many cases, people are going to be more worried about not being able to afford goods in the future because of the declining value of their dollar, because of the increasing price of those goods, than they are about the convenience or just the logic of, well, do I need this right now? Do I really want it taking up space in my garage? And once people start thinking that way about different goods, the volume of transactions is going to drop immensely as people stop offering things for sale, because people decide, you know what, I'd rather have my stuff than to sell my stuff and get money for it. And it's the exact same thing that you see in the classical example of with Gresham's law and gold coins. When you make paper legal tender, and people think to themselves, well, gee, why would I want to spend my gold coin when I'm going to get paper when I'm going to get paper for it or something down the road? I'd much rather just hang on to my gold coin. And then all of a sudden you see no gold coins circulating in the economy as money anymore. And so as people start to fear, gee, I shouldn't sell this item because it's going to go up so much in price by the time that I need to buy something like it again, I'm just going to hang on to it. They quit selling things. Inventory starts dropping because nobody is offering anything for sale. Just like with trucks, people are not going to sell their trucks. I know I'm not selling either of my trucks. George, who talks about how he used to flip trucks, which again was good business. I've known lots and lots of people who just understand that market like I do. That was the first market that I ever studied. I mean, I was very familiar I could have done what George has done back when I was like 12, because I knew those trucks that well. I knew many people who bought and sold them, because if you find somebody who wants to get rid of it, they sell it a couple thousand under what the market value is. You know probably 5 people who would buy that truck tomorrow at market value, and you could make a couple $1,000s. And this is the same logic behind people who buy or sell or buy and flip houses, although it's much harder to do that. Housing prices, people tend to do a lot more research before selling their house. But you end up with the same problem. When prices start going up so rapidly, inventory is going to drop, because people who currently own a house say, you know what, sure, I can sell my house, get a lot of money for it, but where the hell am I going to go? Am I going to go rent a place at and sit on a waiting list for a year and a half to get into an apartment? And even when I do, the rent is ridiculous, like $2,400 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, around where I live? Or am I going to take my money that I got from selling my house and then go and try and buy another house, but prices are rising so rapidly that by the time that I buy another house, I'm going to be able to get I'm not going to be able to get as good of a house as I came from. So there's no more real incentive anymore to sell unless you absolutely have to, or unless new construction. But I mean, if you're new construction, then you got to deal with the lumber prices. And so I think what George is tapping into here is very important. It's something that I haven't talked about a whole lot, and it's this sort of it is that Gresham's law psychology that gets into people's heads, and this leads to low volume of transactions across the economy in all sorts of different things. It's not just houses. It's not just 90s diesel 4-wheel drive pickup trucks. It's all sorts of things. Maybe it's people pawning their tools. I don't know. It could be vintage video games. It's something else I used to know very well. I'm not sure what prices are now these days. I'm sure that vintage video games are well out of the point to where it'd be fun for me to collect them. But who knows? Considering how fast everything else is going up, maybe video games aren't as bad. But anyway, things across the board, goods, I see transaction volume declining as a result of this psychology. And it's sort of a ripple effect from the decline in production that I've been talking about, and how just replacing people who were producing things, replacing their income and allowing them to continue to consume without producing, is going to lead to less production, and therefore is going to create scarcity in the market. Well, once you have scarcity on sort of the productive end of new goods, let's say new televisions, because of copper shortages or semiconductor shortages and things like that, laptops, cars, well, then the secondhand market is going to take a hit there too, because the secondhand market, it's you're relying on individuals who presumably are buying new things to sell their old stuff, and once price once prices are rising fast enough in those sectors or of the economy, the various secondhand markets, cars, TVs, tools, whatever. That's when you see volume absolutely fall off a cliff, and therefore what little supply there is, people are willing to pay an exorbitant price for. Now, in cases like this, then what do you do with your money? And frankly, I don't know what you do, because as someone who tends to put a lot of stock in, and no pun intended, in shadow stats and in following the rate of inflation as it was measured in the olden days, before 1980 and before 1990, the old measures of inflation that were more accurate, the kinds of the measures of inflation that they used back in the 70s during stagflation. According to that metric, inflation is over 10% now, and if that's the case, you would expect the inflation hedges like gold to be up as much, because if you're an inflation hedge, then you should be moving with inflation. If prices are going up by 10% overall in the economy, you would think that gold would be going up by 10%. And so if gold's no longer an inflation hedge, or at least it isn't at the moment, I don't know. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not deep enough of a gold guy to say whether that means that it's all just all bunched up and it's going to slingshot at some point. I don't know. I'm not getting into that. Again, none of this is financial advice, by the way. I'm just a guy who talks into a can. But anyway, if you can't rely on that, people say, there's Bitcoin. Yeah, Bitcoin's the new gold. The gold is old hat. Well, I've problems with Bitcoin too, which I don't want to get into right now. Go ahead and leave all your thumbs down you want. If I said I have problems with Bitcoin and don't want to get into it and you're mad about that, I don't care. But my point is, what are people going to do? People can't, people know that inflation is more severe than is being priced into gold, so people can't exactly rush and buy gold to try and preserve their assets, preserve their wealth. And Bitcoin is highly volatile, and people are going to be scared of that. What are they going to do? They're just going to take the stuff that they already have and hang on to it, because they know, hey, this house I have has value to me. It allows me to live. This car has value to me. It allows me to drive around. These guns have value to me. Guns, of course, are another thing that's gone up exponentially in the last year or so, over a year. Ammunition, of course. But the one thing nobody wants and nobody really needs is money. Who needs money when you can go and the government will give it to you for free, $16 an hour. That's why nobody's showing up for work. I just talked about that a couple days ago. That's the whole story of the jobs report. And back to George's point, he used a word that I don't often like to use, and that is hyperinflation. And the reason why I never used the term hyperinflation is because I remember after 2008, in the subsequent years, there were all these people warning about hyperinflation and how terrible it was and how it was coming and that it was inevitable and that, the hyperinflation. And so and those guys, of course, ended up being wrong in talking about that QE after 2008 would lead to hyperinflation. And I've gone over before on this channel, I don't want to get into it right now, why that was the case. But because of that, I've always been very reticent to use that term. But what George is observing here is how you would get not just normal levels of inflation, but in fact hyperinflation, and that is a very sudden and steep drop-off in the volume of transactions, in the supply of goods on the supply side. People just saying, hey, I don't want to sell things anymore. I don't want the money. I just want my stuff, and hanging on to it. That's a pretty good recipe for very, very high inflation. But one important ingredient into the sort of the mix that would really push us towards a hyperinflationary direction, which George brings up, is bank participation, and that's just something that I don't really see. I don't see the banks getting off of the sidelines. It's just, I don't see why all of a sudden they would change their behavior. I think the banks are plenty happy with their government-guaranteed loans. They're very happy originating mortgages and then flipping them to Fannie and Freddie. I think they're very happy being primary dealer banks for the Treasury. I don't see where the banking system is going to come in and really get more involved in the private sector than they currently are. But even without that, the high levels of inflation, the way in which inflation will be exacerbated by people who choose not to sell because of the rate of price inflation. It's sort of the inverse of the old Keynesian argument against deflation, saying, oh my gosh, deflation is so terrible because if the value of goods goes down year over year, consumers won't go out and buy anything because they'll say, you know what, no, I'll just wait till next year to buy whatever I need. And then, we get into a downward spiral where prices just hit rock bottom. And of course, I and many others always said that's absurd. If people need something, they're going to go out and buy it. They're not going to wait a year. If they need a new drill, or if they need to put tires on their car, they're not going to sit around for a year. Generally, when you need something, you go out and buy it at whatever price it is at that point. It's just like we know that every year appliances go on sale for the 4th of July. Yet there's lots and lots of people who buy appliances throughout the year when they're at their regular price. I'm sure for plenty of other stores or other examples where you know that there's going to be regular discounts at some point if you just wait long enough. There are people who go in when there's no discount, when things are at their regular price, and they just choose to buy it because that's when they need that good. Because when you're the consumer, you don't have as much flexibility where that's concerned. If this is truly an item you need. However, if you're on the supply side, if you're a seller, you do have that kind of flexibility because you already have that good. You can either use that good or not use that good, but you have it. You have access to it either way, whether you are going to actively use it or not. By holding on to the good and refraining from selling, because you're thinking, well, gee, if the price is going up so fast, I'll just sell it later, or I'll just hang on to it for now because I might need it later and I don't want to have to buy it back. The only constraint on you is the extent to which you need money. But if the price of if money is becoming less scarce, which is what happens if prices are going up so much like that, you probably don't need the money. And if you really need the money, you can sell something else, or just you don't have to sell as much of your stuff as you otherwise would have. And so it's much easier to get into an inflationary spiral than a deflationary spiral. Of course, a deflationary spiral is a good thing because that means that the cost of living is falling. An inflationary spiral is a bad thing, always, because it means that the cost of living is going up at a faster and faster pace. And so really any goods that relies on a strong secondhand market, like housing, like used cars, they're going to probably see higher rates of inflation than stuff like ketchup, because there are additional factors in there. When you have a kind of good that has both a primary and secondary market, both the producers who initially create the project and originate it, as well as consumers who are reselling the product, they have to compete with one another. On the one hand, the used market it has trouble competing and has to have low prices because there's this supply of brand new cars you go and buy. So unless you can buy a used one at a significant discount, well, why wouldn't you just go out and buy a brand new one? The same thing is true of a brand new car. If the price of a brand new car is $55,000 and a used one is $15,000, well then it's pretty hard to justify buying a new one. But if all of a sudden the used car market drops off a cliff, and there's the supply of used cars, kind of like what happened after Cash for Clunkers, when they just decided to crush and melt down a bunch of used cars in the U.S. economy to artificially inflate the price of automobiles and stimulate demand for brand new cars. Well, then the new car makers are able to charge even more money than they otherwise would have had the transaction volume of used cars remain constant as the price was going up. See, there's two levels to this. At first, what we witness in an inflationary environment is goods becoming more scarce. Supply is declining, and that's why prices are rising. But then we get this Gresham's law effect to where supply is actually declining because prices of those very goods are rising, and not just the cost of inputs. And so what this is just sort of a microeconomic level of phenomenon that you would see in an event in which people start to abandon a currency. It's the kind of mindset that can get out of control very fast. And the worst thing for the central bank is that it's something completely out of their control. Yes, I would say that the way that central banks have handled themselves in the situation has led us down this road. Obviously, I say that whenever I talk about the economy, but they cannot just snap their fingers and suddenly make people think that, hey, if I sell my house today, I'll be able to buy one tomorrow and it'll be okay. I mean, this is just a side effect of price instability, whether it's to the upside or to the downside. And that's the problem with trying to figure out, okay, well, what's going to go up, what's going to go down, what does the end game look like here? And it's not really possible to know, because the nature of distorted markets is that the prices are unstable, and you can't really rely on fundamental market signals anymore. I'm starting to question the very concept of an inflation premium, because when we see that inflation is getting as out of hand as it is, yet the market doesn't seem to be pricing that in anywhere, well, what does the inflation premium mean then? Does it mean that we just have heavily negative real interest rates, or does it mean that the markets now just completely ignore inflation, the credit markets, I mean? Because my thesis now for a while has been that the only way this bubble ends is if the bond market forces interest rates higher by acknowledging the reality of inflation, and therefore working the inflation premium into the rate of interest, which will trigger a revaluation of assets across the entire U.S. economy. And that's why ultimately, even if we have a period of sustained high inflation, that is ultimately going to lead to a deflationary environment, or at least that's what I thought. Whether or not we saw significant consumer price inflation, or how long we would see consumer price inflation, it was a matter of when the bond market decided to price that inflation into the rate of interest. But again, we're at that point when everybody can see the inflation except for the bond market. Is the bond market ever going to price in the inflation? I mean, perhaps not. I just don't know at this point. As things continue to get worse like this, it's make or break for interest rates. And if the bond market refuses to acknowledge inflation, then we're just going to be stuck in an inflationary environment to where consumer prices are going up as much as all these other assets, and there's really nowhere to hide. If interest rates rose in reaction to rising consumer prices, well, then you could just wait for the deflation of the asset market, go in and buy assets when they're cheap, and you'll be able to be in much better shape even if consumer prices are going up. At least you'll be able to go in and buy hard assets for a decent price. Sure, maybe toothpaste goes to $10 a tube, but at least maybe you'll be able to own your own home. But honestly, at this point, if things don't start to crack this year, after everything that we're seeing bubbling up now, I don't know what things look like next year. I don't know what 2022 looks like if this situation does not begin to unwind. How much scarcity and inflation are we going to have to endure? I mean, private money should be fleeing the credit markets right now and flooding into anything that has, a decent yield. Because that's just another way of thinking about the inflation premium is that, well, if the price of everything else is going up so much faster than the rate of interest, why would I loan my money out when I can just go and buy something like a truck that's appreciating at a faster rate? Because, the credit market is the market, for money. The interest rate is the price of money. And ultimately, investors want to make money not just so that they can hoard more dollars. They want more purchasing power. They want more wealth. And if they can't do that by investing in the bond market or any of these other sectors of credit, why would they not just go out and buy stuff that is appreciating at a rate that will preserve and if not increase their wealth? Obviously, the Fed is playing a big role. The Fed targets interest rates. We know this. The Fed is openly manipulates the bond market. But there's enough of a private sector still there. The Fed is not the entire bond market. There's a huge bond market outside of the Fed. The Fed's just buying $120 billion a month right now. So where are those guys? What are they doing? What do they plan to do with these dollars that they're accumulating at 1.5%? It's still a mystery to me. So if you have any idea, please do leave a comment. But with that said, I think that'll be where I end things off because I don't know where to go from here.